much for coming out today to our Black History Month program for Meet the Author. Today we have with us Kayla Ancrum. She is a Chicago author who has written quite a few YA books that circulate really well in our library, and we would love to just highlight her and praise her for a minute for the great job that she's done. So, thank you. And this is Kayla.
So I am a young adult author. I tend to write for older teenagers, usually 17, 20. I prefer to write thrillers, and I have a couple new thrillers coming out. My most popular book is The Wicker King, which is a mixed media teen thriller about mental illness and being neglected by your parents. I have Darling, which is a Peter Pan adaptation set in Chicago, very urban, very train focused, and a little bit dark, kind of murdery. And then this is The Weight of the Stars, which is one of the books that I've written that isn't a thriller. It is a lesbian light sci-fi romance. And I wrote it because the entire Women Who Love Women community supported The Wicker King when it first came out with so much fervor that I was like, you know what? I'm using my second book deal to give something to you. So I created this book for that community that had lifted me up so much.
Well, why don't you tell, for people that don't know about your different books, tell us a little bit about The Wicker King and also Darling, because that was my personal favorite.
All right. So The Wicker King I actually wrote when I was in college. I wrote it my senior year. I did not get good grades that year, but I finished my senior year. I very much started out, I started writing books when I was 12. So it's something I've been doing for a really long time. I wasn't necessarily taking it particularly seriously. It was just something that I did as a hobby, and I'd share it with my friends. They all laugh. I just kind of be like, that sure was good. But I started posting my books on Tumblr, and with the way that kind of that social media explodes and stuff like that, people started finding it. And an agent reached out to me and was like, I think you should try. And querying agents is free, and I didn't have any money because I was in college. So I was like, you know what, whatever, I'm 21. If they don't like it, I'm 21. I could try again when I'm in my 40s, which is how old the majority of the authors are. So I was not that scared of it, and it was free, so I just did it. And I didn't expect the kind of response that I got back for my work, because I don't have elaborate plots. I'm intensely focused on character study, and I was just writing these stories about these kids, and I really, at the time, the tapestry of LGBT fiction for youth was significantly less than it is now. So I really wanted to write a book about some kids who were LGBTQ, who were dealing with something that was significantly more stressful than being LGBTQ. So that was what I was kind of working on for The Wicker King. It's a story about these two boys, both of whom are struggling with brain-related health problems. One of them has a disorder called peduncular hallucinosis, and the other one has what eventually begins to express itself as borderline personality disorder. And I wrote the book from the perspective of the kid who has borderline, and showcased him behaving in such a way that if you are an adult or a child who cares about mental health, you will notice that he's exhibiting mental health problems. But he is kind of a caretaker of the other kid who has a severe physical brain issue, and really wanted to showcase, because I was very young when I was writing it, the ways that me and my friends when we were in high school were being failed by our teachers, by our parents, and weren't stepping in, weren't doing very much stuff, and that we kind of all as a community decided not to fail each other by trying our best to help each other and lift each other up. But when you're a teenager, you don't have that many resources. So I really wanted to kind of illustrate that in all of its depth, both the sorrow of it and the triumph of watching kids try to help other kids. So that's what The Wicker King is about. Darling, I actually came up with the plot for this book in the same year as I came up with the plot for The Weight of the Stars and The Wicker King. I do this thing where I'll have a year where I just sow, and then I'll just reap for the rest of the other years. So I came up with Darling, this one, that one, and a train heist novel that's going to be coming out probably 2023, all in 2014. And I've just been, one by one, just finishing writing them. When I came up with the plot for Darling, which is a chapter-by-chapter adaptation of the original Peter Pan, I really did not feel that my writing quality was at the level that it needed to be to achieve this academic project, because to me it's an academic project. So I wrote these two first, and then spent the time when I was writing these doing a ton of research on Peter Pan, the history of Peter Pan, writer of Peter Pan, all of these like master's thesis doctorates about Peter Pan, analyzing Peter Pan, women in Peter Pan, child neglected Peter Pan, Peter is a monster, Peter is a savior, sort of stuff. Very, very interesting. And then I sat down and I didn't change pretty much anything from the original story, and just chapter by chapter wrote whatever would be the modern equivalent of whatever was happening in the book. And then because of the way that I feel about like Peter as a character, the lessons that I have to teach, children, I decided to kind of shift the ending, and I'm not going to give any spoilers, but it definitely was a book that was designed to be read alongside the original and talked about in classroom discussions.
Okay, so to kind of jump on that, my question is, how did you see it as a thriller? Because I mean, everyone knows this cute little story of Peter Pan and Captain Hook and Tinkerbell. How did you reimagine it to be this epic, like Chicago kind of underground detective case that it became? I'm just curious about that process.
So the original book of Peter Pan, which is Peter and Wendy, it came out in 1911, after the play was written, is a very interesting type of book. How many people here have watched the movie Coraline? Read anything about Coraline? Okay, so it's very, very similar to that book, in which it is designed by the author to be read by a parent to a child, in which the child is experiencing a different version of the story than the adult is experiencing while reading it, simply because of the amount of life experience between a child and an adult. So children watch Coraline, read Coraline, it's an adventure story about a girl triumphing over evil, she's having a wonderful time, things are spooky but not that dangerous, she goes home and everything's great, right? Parents and a lot of older teenagers and adults will watch the movie and be just horrified, just gut horrified, because their experience of what's going on is just so layered by their life experience and their world experience that they understand the extreme amount of danger that was going on in that story. Peter Pan is the same way. The book, when you're reading it as a kid, your understanding of Wendy's role in the story, Peter Pan as a character, all of the Lost Boys, all of that is very kind of child empowerment. They had created their own family unit, they're in danger but they can foil the danger, there's physical fights that they succeed at. Reading it as an adult, oh my god. Peter, first of all, they tell you very clear that Peter murders the children. They tell you in the beginning of the book. They're like, okay, he has memory loss, he's very reckless with all of their friends, all this stuff and whatever. The children aren't immortal the way that Peter is. When they get to be a certain age, it says that he thins them out, he cults them. So they live to be about 12, which is about the age that Peter represents as, and then he kills them. And then later they talk about how he'll disappear for the whole day and then come back and have weird memory loss stuff, and they go and they find a body, and I was just like, damn. And then later, as the book progresses, you realize that Peter's motivations are very, very self-centered, very, very, he's not evil, he's just extremely wicked in a way that only children can be wicked because they do not understand the impact of their actions. So children who accidentally kill their siblings because of roughhousing is the vibe that Peter gives as an adult reading that book. And then when you get to the end of the book is not how any of you would have remembered the Disney movie. Peter comes back to visit Wendy. Wendy is an adult. Wendy has a daughter named, I think, Moira. And Peter is very focused on her child. And she's standing there watching Peter focus on her child, be like, let's go off an adventure, whatever. He doesn't even remember Wendy. Wendy's like, oh, Peter, it's so lovely to see you. And he's just like, who the fuck are you? There's very much, and there's this extremely uncomfortable feeling that you get when ending the original book, where you're like, this is not a child. This is a type of monster that preys on children. And having the ability to age and grow to the point where you can see that this is a monstrous situation, and that you can see that the pirates as being the only human adults in that society who are very focused not on harming everybody else, but specifically on him. What kind of relationship he has with all of the creatures, people, children in the Neverland that he lives in, and also what kind of impact that he has on children in the real world. So it was just a straight shot. I didn't change anything. And I was like, the reason that I wanted that to that I did a chapter by chapter adaptation and spent so much time doing research to make this read the way that it needed to read was because I wanted to not add any murder, any mystery, anything else that was already there in the original, so I can just point to it and say, this is the horror that exists. This is not the horror that I'm adding, it is not the horror that I'm creating, it is the horror that exists.
Okay. All right, so one of our first questions, our secondary questions was, what drew you to writing YA books as opposed to adult or kids fiction?
Well, when I started, I was a teenager, so that's all I do. Like, writing about adult things when you're a teenager just is so, I'm not saying it's impossible, it's just extremely difficult because you haven't lived enough to know, like, world building things. When you're a teenager, your world is very small. It's your school, it is your parents, it is your neighborhood, you know, whatever. When you get older, you have more access. So it's hard to write believably about adults from an adult perspective as a teenager. And then for children, specifically middle grade, I actually read way more middle grade than I read young adult. You have to be so intelligent to write middle grade because middle grade writers are not only just writing a story that children can enjoy, whatever, they have to write in a way that makes children care about reading at all. So they have to be funny, suspenseful, interesting, you know, mysterious, and not too scary, and their words can't be too big or too little, or, you know, just all of that stuff. And that takes somebody who has the ability to craft at a level that, like, I just wasn't at, you know, 20, and I knew that I wasn't at that level. And it's actually something that I am hoping to become good enough to write middle grade fiction, because it definitely is a doozy. And when you know, read about authors like Lemony Snicket, Mysterious, you know, Benedict Society type middle grade books, you don't really think about that aspect of them, but when you are teaching them, and I've done like a bit of teaching in the classroom and stuff like that, the way that they are specifically designed to be taught and to be consumed by children of a specific reading level is absolutely a type of artistry. But, you know, for young adult fiction, there's this thing that I feel very strongly about, and it's a little bit morose, but when it comes to LGBT fiction, I'm very lucky that I've managed to get like a mainstream position to be able to create this content, especially the kind of diverse content that I create. Acceptance of LGBT work, just LGBT media, TV, movies, it's like a waning and waxing sort of situation. Like, there were times in our past where it was just as easy to access and just as easy to publish as it is now. And those times came and went and came and went and came and went. So as a young adult fiction author who writes LGBT fiction, I try very hard to write for the children of now and for the children of the future in a time where this will be all that they have to access, you know? So, you know, now that I'm finally at the age where I probably can write adult and get away with it and know what's going on, like, I'm still trying to create this content in as many diverse packages as I possibly can for a future where it will not be accessible. And significantly with a lot of the book bans and all of this stuff and whatever, we're starting to see a little bit of agitation in that regard. And all of my books, and you won't really notice it as much when you're reading it in the time that we are now, but I designed them to have as little technology that is available now. The way that I'll write about certain things that are happening is kind of like timeless. I don't describe things about social media. I'll say something like, you know, oh, I talked to her online. I won't say I talked to her on Facebook, I talked to her on Instagram. I'll say, you know, she was really popular online, because the concept of that has lasted 30 years, whereas the concept of certain social medias or certain technologies has been 10, 15, I can't guarantee that. So I'm trying to write for maybe 20 years in the future to have this still be relevant, and I'm trying to cover all of my bases. Like, you know, I have a book coming out with an intersex character. There's very, very little work about intersex characters. I'm publishing it on purpose because I don't know if I'll be able to do so in the future, or if it will be available in the future.
Well, we know that you are dropping, or did you just drop Murder of Crows?
Just dropped it.
Okay. It just came out, so can you tell us a little bit about it, and also like give us a little spoiler of like what we can expect, because I know I'm personally waiting anxiously for it to get on our shelves here at the library.
Certainly. So Murder of Crows is a book, it is an IP project from the Scholastic podcast Lethal Lit. It is a podcast that surrounds Tig Torres, who's a Cuban-American girl who moved from New York City to a very small town called Hollow Falls, and is extremely Twin Peaks, just repackaged for children. And it's about her and her two best friends trying to solve the mystery of who killed her aunt with like a serial killer aspect to the town, basically. And after they finished the first season of their podcast, they were very, very excited, and it did extremely well. And they were looking for an author that was like funny and dark at the same time. And I have a very like exuberant Twitter presence where like a lot of them were just straight dark, we're just going for the darkness. But on Twitter I'm very like vivacious and whatever. So they're like, we think you can handle that, line between. So they hired me to write it alongside of the original writers for Lethal Lit. So because they're kind of doing like a murder mystery Twin Peaks sort of thing, they have for each season or for each like media that they're doing for this, they have like one main serial killer who's doing a bunch of stuff, right? So the first one was a killer who killed her aunt and a bunch of other people in town, who was a member of this like super creepy club called the Murder of Crows. The second book is the Murder of Crows, and you're focusing on their little club of all the town weirdos who hang out and talk about murder together. And it's about her trying to figure out who is picking off members of that club, kind of again. They had me, I'm a character study focused author, so I don't do like really detailed plots. I'm just like, everyone was sad for 300 pages. That's it. But they were like, we have to make it exciting. We need a new murder for every chapter. I'm like, that sounds like too many murders. They're like, it's not enough murder. And they had me write like, just think about just different kinds of, stuff to make it feel very diverse. So I did like a stabbing murder, an explosion murder, like a run over by a train murder, some guy got sucked into a pit. Like it's just everything like that. Very outside of my comfort zone, and very funny and interesting. The cast of characters is Tig, her friend Max, who is gay, and her friend Wynn, who is a lesbian. And they told me, hey, we're gonna have, Wynn and Tig fall in love. And I was like, cool, I can totally write that. I've done that before. And they were like, but they can't be in love in your book. And I'm like, and they were like, they have to like be flirting with each other, but like not really, And I was just like, I'll try. So there is like a budding kind of like almost like on the hinges of maybe a romance between those two characters. And then in the third season of the podcast, which actually came out like earlier this week, they actually go full Monty. So that's what the book is about.
Awesome. What considerations do you really take into when you're trying to adapt characters that already exist?
Well, first of all, it very much feels like fan fiction. It doesn't not feel like fan fiction, like as you would assume. When authors are hired for projects like, working for Marvel or working for, DC or Scooby-Doo or whatever, which by the way, the people who own Murder of Crows also own Scooby-Doo, so I'm like trying to see if I can like hop in there. Good gracious, I could write Scooby-Doo. But first of all, because it feels like fan fiction, because it is fan fiction, there's the understanding that you are using characters for which you have limited information. Because when you are writing your original characters, you know things about them that other people don't know or that don't make it to the page. Like, oh, this person's afraid of spiders, this person likes lemonade, whatever. And when somebody else is writing your character, they're like, her favorite drink is Dr. Pepper. And you're like, in your heart that it's lemonade. And you can't be like, it's not lemonade, because you didn't tell them that. So I wound up having all of these fights with the creators at Scholastic, and they were like, Tig would never do that, blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, I listened to the podcast to prepare for this opportunity because you paid me $15,000 and I can't not listen to the whole podcast religiously to figure out what's in it. And you never said that shit. And they're like, well, we want to make it like that. I'm like, okay, well, tell me. Don't just yell at me for not knowing. So it's like very difficult to work on. And I don't know if I'm interested in doing IP projects in the future, but it felt very weird. But it was also an experience where I was like, okay, there are these paper dolls that I've been given. Somebody made them with love, They wanted to show something in the way that I want to show something with my work, with my, art. It is a privilege for me to be able to write somebody else's characters and have them be accepted by the mainstream as canon. And I have to approach it with respect and grace. And I think I tried my best to do justice to what they had created.
Wow, that's a lot. You as an author, what is your underlying process that you go through when you're either when you're going through your different stages of the book and conceiving what it is that you want to eventually turn into what's on paper? What's your overall process look like? I'm just so curious as a writer myself.
Well, I'm very organized. I visibly have ADHD. Some of you can tell by the way that I'm talking about things. But because I have such a inbred disorganization of the way that my brain works and the way that I like conceive of certain things. I have to have the discipline to be able to do book writing in a very specific way, or else it'll never get done, you know? So when I'm writing a book, I write the plot first. I'll write a 3 to 4 page document. This is everything that's about to happen in the book, and I'm like, yeah. Then I write another like plot-like thing where I write about how I want the reader to feel while reading the book. So this is how I want them to enter the world. I want it to feel this sort of way when they're stepping into this space. I wanted the Wicker King to feel very carceral when they're coming into it, very institutionalized feeling. And then you learn about the town, and it's this breath of nature and community and everything like that, only after the carceral feeling. For The Way of the Stars, I wanted to be very like fall morning on a cold school day, you know? You're entering this space, it's uncomfortable because of the environment, but these are people who are soldiering through their poverty, the weather, all that stuff. For Darling, I very much wanted it to be like a girl that you can tell is kind of spoiled, very spirited away. She's complaining in the car, you know, and then she learns real problems, and she's like, ooh, 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 I don't have any complaints anymore. Like, I really wanted to create that environment, so I write that like emotional journey. For the climax of The Wicker King, I wanted that you know, the stress of understanding that they're in trouble. I wanted the drama of their romance not really fully being together yet. I wanted the, you know, anxiety of having them be very in danger because they are drowning each other in a bathtub. Like, you know, just that sort of circumstance. And then I'm a happy ending person because things are bad enough. So, you know, the different types of happy endings, the esoteric, worldly, you know, ending of The Way of the Stars, of the way that I wanted, you know, it to feel like, you know, the main character was coming out of water for a breath of fresh air after a long time being submerged in The Wicker King, and the way I wanted this one to feel very much like the ending of a family-friendly 90s comedy about having too many children, like for Darling. You know, those emotions, I want to write them down and how I want the reader to feel in that journey. And then I write a third one that is a textual analysis, like the way you're in school and your, you know, teachers are like, oh, you have to read Shakespeare and figure out what he was supposed to mean and think about all these historical things and analyze what you think the color blue meant. I'll write that for my own work because I know that people will do that while I'm not watching. And if I write anything weird, they're gonna figure it out. Like, so I need to have a handle on that. So I take these 3 outlines, which gives me the ability to look at my writing process from a bird's eye view, which allows me to move things around really easily to find something that's, you know, very well designed, without having to rewrite something, write myself out of a corner, or waste thousands and thousands of words, because it is a struggle to get myself to even sit down and do the writing, you know? So every time that I sit down to do it, that's the first time. This is basically a first draft. All of my first drafts, immediate acceptance because of that organization of that text. So I write that down, and then I go back and I take the outline that I wrote of the plot and I split it into chapters. And then for Darling, I would literally just come home from work, sit down, open the document, and be like, now you're writing about them doing this. And I'm like, I'm gonna write about them doing this. And like, I would just write the chapter. And then when I was done, I turned in the book, and then I turned in the outline. And I was like, this is the same. Here's your product to Macmillan, you know? And then for books that are a little bit more loosey-goosey like these, I'll split it further into individual chapters. So right now, I'm writing a book called Icarus that is about a art thief and a guy that he meets while he's doing that. And for each, like in those individual short chapters, I'll write like a sentence like, at school, doing this, doing that, doing this. So I can see what the passage of time looks like from a bird's eye view to make sure that like the pacing is going the way that I want it to. And then I'll sit down and I'll be like, I have to write this, 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 and this, and I'll just write it.
Okay. I know for me as a writer, I always get stuck like right in that, like, okay, I'm going in this direction, and all of a sudden I just hit writer's block. Can you talk a little bit, I know you talked about how like you're super organized so you know where you're trying to go, but how do you combat that when you find yourself getting stuck somewhere you don't necessarily want to be?
I give myself a bit of a breath of fresh air. So with the way that my outlines are, I know that eventually I have to get from point A to point B. So if I'm writing about, let's say, them being in a restaurant having a bad time, I'm like, okay, I have to get them to the train station having a bad time. And the thing in the middle is just like this nothingness, and there's nothing there for me. I'll try to write some filler. I'll be like, it's time for jokes. Now they're walking in the street, talking about stuff, and it's funny. Or, you know, oh, they're in a nearby corner store just having a little side venture that just might be more interesting for me, because most of the time my writer's block comes in spaces where there's nothingness that has been planned, you know? Because if you're writing, like let's say you're preparing to write like a battle or something big in fantasy or a big romance scene, stuff like that, like you know, like as a creator, as a storyteller, your heart knows what is meant to be there. Whether it is just the emotion of the battle, the emotion of the drama, or the technical aspects of a fight, or the technical aspects of a political discussion, or a big speech, or whatever. And the drive to fill that space will always propel you forward because you have that data there. But when there's a nothingness, there's a breath of time between a character having a fight with another character and before some major event happens. That's when a lot of the time writer's block will come in, because you're like, well, what do I do now? Like, I know I'm gonna get there, but what do I do now? And I think that there is when you have your opportunity to just kind of like do what you feel like. Oh, you know, you're not really in the mood to write like a sonorous, you know, middle page or whatever. Time to be funny, time to write something sad, time to do some introspection. Whatever it is that you fill that space, and then when you're going back through the book, you can always take it out and put something else there. You know, especially because if you have an outline, nothing is moved that cannot be moved, you know? So you have your plot, you have your major sections that you're writing, and then when you're looking at it from above, you can see the places where you can add things and remove things, and those spaces are often the spaces where writer's block happens.
Well, this was a really good one from one of our teens. They asked, they know that you were a member of Lambda Literary Society, and they thought it was a really awesome thing. Can you tell a little bit of what kind of doors that opened for you?
It's gonna sound weird, but like not many. Like, I am a young black woman. It is very much, this isn't something that people talk about. There are actually hierarchies within being an author. Like, I'm clearly not a Suzanne Collins or a Veronica Roth or a J.K. Rowling, obviously. But enough people are here that somebody's heard of me, basically. So I'm what is called a mid-list author. The amount of money that my publisher will invest in me is always significantly less than a Veronica Roth, but significantly more than, you know, a lot of other authors. I can't name them because, you know, it's relatively rare. And opportunities that would immediately go to like a Veronica Roth are something that like people wouldn't even really consider me for, or wouldn't, you know, pick me out of a hat and be like, oh, I recognize that person, I'll give them this. So majority of the opportunities that I've made, I've created for myself. I use my Twitter account to create an environment that I actually did on Tumblr, because I am a marketing bitch. I went to, I have one class away from a marketing degree. I got my English degree and got out of there, but I'm very marketing focused, and I design my social media presences to create these opportunities for myself. So I am friends with a lot of editors, friends with a lot of people in Hollywood, friends with a lot of people doing producer stuff, behind the scenes stuff, people who work for like Marvel and DC, but I'm not friends with them in a like networking way. I'm friends with them in a like, did you see the last episode of Supernatural kind of way, you know? Or like I'll talk about just weird stuff that I'm interested in talking about. Like I talked about Frankenstein just funnily for like a night at 1 o'clock in the morning, and I was like, because I want to give you an example of this and what kind of opportunities this sort of stuff leads to so that you actually believe me. But I was talking about Frankenstein and about how I don't think Frankenstein's monster was actually ugly because he worked so hard to find all the Hawkeye parts to like put him together. So I think he's hot. But he also made him 7 feet tall in an era where people were short. So I think that everybody was like startled and horrified because they would just be going about their little lives, and all of a sudden he'd be looming behind them, giant shadow, horrifying, can't even speak. And everybody thought that was really funny. And then Simon and Schuster reached out to me to write a Frankenstein book. Like they picked me to write a Frankenstein book and are trying to give me money to write it. I didn't have to court them at all. And then I wrote for a really long time about my feelings about Bucky and Sam from Captain America. And I was just like, ha ha ha, you know, whatever, just talking about nonsense and shippy stuff and fan fiction or whatever, just very embarrassing. And Marvel reached out to me to audition to write for a Sam and Bucky book that they were gonna have coming out, and the only reason I didn't get that opportunity is because the idea that I came up with was almost identical to the concept of the Loki show, but they hadn't even released anything about the Loki show yet. So they picked up my thing and they're like, oh no, we can't do this. And just ghosted me. But those kind of opportunities come from being somebody who is able to curate a social media space that allows people to understand me as a person and consider me for options because they think I'm interesting, which is also where they got the Lambda thing. I think I was talking about how much I enjoy doing school visits and talking to kids and giving people vital information about becoming an author, becoming a writer, or anything like that, and how important that I feel being a contributor to my community is. And they were like, that sounds like somebody who needs to be doing this as a part of their job, and they reached out to me. So that's how that worked.
Oh, okay. Well, I want to give the audience an opportunity to kind of, put their input and get their questions asked. So is there any questions or just ideas on the floor that you guys want to bring up?
I will answer questions about anything, including details of the background, the publishing structure, publishing industry, anything about writing, anything about me as a person, and what kind of jobs that I do while at the same time as being an author, anything about creative, any questions about my characters in my books, full gamut. Yes?
I have a question about your books specifically. I know that a lot of them deal with darker themes, and so I know that in that sense they're not really sort of made to be escapism for like readers, but I do really love when I'm reading them that generally the fact that the characters are queer isn't really like it's not that big of a source of trauma for them as opposed to the other things in their life. And I was wondering about if that's like intentional and how you go about like letting that little bit of escapism kind of be in the books, that they kind of get to have these like loves where even if the loves are difficult in a way, it's not because they're
Yes, actually, it's intentional. It's so as somebody who's creating children's entertainment and taking into consideration that thing I said about waxing and waning and stuff like that, I wanted to create a very realistic look at what it's like when you are queer in a circumstance where you are allowed to be, what that looks like in this era. So with my friend groups, a majority of the people are also, some variety of LGBTQ. Sometimes there's a straight token friend, like how a lot of the times people grow up and, especially in the past, they'll talk about being friends with all their friends, none of them really talking about, LGBT things or really processing that. And then as soon as they get to like college age, everybody starts coming out. And it's kind of like this thing where we all kind of find each other, regardless of whether we are open about that. And I wanted to like do some honor towards that in these books. I also wanted to honor people not necessarily having everything figured out themselves about their own identity. Being a human being is about growing, developing, and changing. We are impacted by the time that we live in our environments in which we grow. So some people may identify one way at a certain point in their life, they may identify another way, they may not 100% know what's going on and be guided by, just whatever attraction develops in whatever circumstance. So very much trying to honor that as well by having the kids focus on, their love for each other, their friendship with each other, their closeness with each other. And some of them will have more information about their identities than others. Like I think in this one, the main character was like, I might kind of like you, and her friend was like, that's Cophead. You like girls. Like, and just the environment that I'm like, how like embarrassed and weird she was about it is very like realistic to me. I wanted to create those examples. Not only because I think that kids enjoy them now because they're like, aha, yes, my friend group and our token straight friend, Melissa, or whatever. But also because there may become a time where that won't be something that's as accessible, and I want kids who either don't have that now or won't have that in the future to see that and be like, that's something that existed, that's something that we could have had, that's something that was in all of the richness that it is. So that's something that I designed in that way. And then in regards to some things not seeming like realistic, there's something else that I do that people have laughed at me about, but I feel really strongly about it. But the dialogue in all of my books is very realistic for most things. Like, the kids are talking the way that most teenagers talk. when it comes to their like romance scenes, their confession scenes, like all of that, intensely poetic, intensely above what most teenagers would be able to do. And it is simply because since there isn't a huge amount of content that is LGBTQ, that part of their relationship coming together has to be perfect. It has to be perfect. It has to feel evocative. It has to feel delicate. It has to feel beautiful in the way that there is like a lot of straight content that will give them that feeling, just, you know, Pride and Prejudice, you know, just that sort of stuff. I'm trying to create that in as like poetic and evocative way as I possibly can for those people, regardless of whether it sounds like what a teenager would say. Because I remember asking people out as a teenager, and it was clumsy as heck. And I'm like, I don't want that for them, to have to live through the reality of what it is to be in that. I want them to see grace.
You recently talked on Twitter about a very specific like feeling you want to give your reader as they go through their books. I'm just wondering if there's like a specific inspiration for that type of feeling that you get throughout your books?
Yes, because before I wrote books, I did other things. This is one of the things that I can do. I was an accomplished painter and sculptor. I also was like a ballerina that was like edging into prima ballerina when I was like 12, so I had other paths. And I picked up A Wrinkle in Time in the back of my classroom bookshelf, all covered with dust, falling apart. And I read it, and I was like, this is the way that I want to communicate with the world artistically. Like, I'm clearly somebody who needs to communicate with the world through art, and I've decided it is now books. And I dropped out of ballet, and I dropped out of painting and sculpting, and I was like, I'm done with that. And like immediately started writing books. And the reason why I was so attracted to A Wrinkle in Time, and I promise I'm getting to your point, but the reason I was so attracted to A Wrinkle in Time was because the author was very deliberate about how she was designing the book, because she had a very specific lesson and very specific feelings that she wanted to teach the children of her era. And it's, you know, Christian woman, had very strong feelings about love and family and community and all that stuff and whatever, but the way that she chose to show it was deliberate and specific, and it's very obvious when you're reading it as an adult, whereas with a kid you're kind of floating through it. But that was the very first book that I read with the eyes of an author than the eyes of a child. And there's this scene where the main character is meeting some aliens, and she meets this alien that's kind of like furry all over, but like very tall and friendly and big or whatever, and she's looking at it and she's like, you know, you're kind of like a monster to me, like you're an alien, like gross, you know. Like, and she's like, but you're so warm and calm, and the like energy that you're giving off is so lovely that I don't know what to call you. And she's, you know, communicating with it, and she's like, you know, like monster isn't the right word, maybe something like a beast. Like a beasts are friendly monsters. They're monstrous, but they are not wicked for the sake of being. And then she's like, and you feel familial to me, not like a mom, not like a sister, maybe like an aunt. And she calls her Aunt Beast. And in that scene, it suddenly like clicked onto me, and I was like, this person is trying their hardest to showcase an environment where a child feels comfortable and protected and loved by somebody who's not their parent, and feels close enough to give them a title with honor, and to like strip away the fear that she has at her appearance, because the appearance doesn't matter, it's the love that matters. And I was like, that shit's fire, okay? Like, I want to be able to do that, you know? So the feeling that I really wanted to, you know, express in my books was this tension that you feel that as an adult, I have never, like, I'm married and I haven't felt this tension the way that you feel it at like 13, 14, 16, 17, where you have a crush on somebody and just everything about them is like magnetic to you, and you feel this like this nervousness that's like a skin nervousness, not like a stomach nervousness, it's like a skin nervousness, and this hunger that feels like a hand hunger, like you very much want to, like, it's not like in a sexual way, but you want to be close to them and to have that like physicality, and you being with them feels so different from being with your friends, and that just like, even if bad stuff is happening, being with them makes it feel like fun or funny or okay or whatever. And it's just this nameless like desire that is not attached to expectation. It's not attached to having children or, you know, getting married on time, or, you know, that person being super attractive or being right for you or anything like that. It's just this draw to another person, and the vulnerability of realizing that you're experiencing a feeling that you haven't experienced before, and you have to be brave in your experience of that feeling. That's that's what I try to bring to all of my books in their own way.
That was a really great question.
Anybody else? Yes.
I have two questions. One, you talked about when you were doing Wicker King and the Weight of the Stars, you had that story and you went back and wrote it. So my first question is, you created it at a point in time, I think 2016 or something like that. When you went back to actually write the Weight of the Stars, did you end up changing anything just due to your experiences in life? And the second one, you said Darling was, you call it your academic kind of. So did you enjoy it? Are you looking to do something along the same lines where you're doing chapter to chapter for another well-known story?
Yes, but for your first question, a little bit. When I wrote all of the plots for that, I was an unpublished author. When you start working in publishing and like being in those spaces, your understanding of like the way publishing marketing works increases kind of through osmosis. So there were certain things about the Weight of the Stars that weren't like marketable features, and I just changed them a little bit. But the thing about being able to write, doing those three outlines, is that when you are doing like an overhead view of your work, you can see what things are important and what like the main messages are. So nothing major that was valuable changed at all, really, you know, for that one. And then for Darling, I very much, like I enjoyed it, and I learned some things about like writing within that space and the way that people react to people adapting material that they love, which I would say is largely negative, because nobody who wrote a Peter Pan book got higher than a 3.6, really, except for me on Goodreads. Like people are, So it's very much a thing where people feel like they own an aspect of an IP project, and you know, if it's not as interesting or matching or fulfilling their own headcanons about their characters or the circumstances or whatever, there is an instinct to be like, I wish it was about this, I want this, or whatever. So it's kind of like a weirder circumstance. Like I very much wanted to do Scooby-Doo, and now I'm like, I don't know if I want to do it. But for classics, there's some wiggle room. For my book Icarus, I'm doing it's a very short story, the original. And I'm doing kind of like a broader framework of, so you got the father, the son, the like extremely intelligent father, the kind of a little bit more airheady son who cares about beauty and cares about all that stuff, the fall, you know, the experience of seeing the sun and all of that will be in that story. And then I have a pitch that is not gonna become relevant for many, many years at this point, because it takes like 2 years for books to come out. But I am pitching a Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde, about a guy who is a like mercenary serial killer, so he kills people for money. He also works in a flower shop, and it's about him matching his identities between what he does in his off hours and what he does for his day job and stuff like that. Something like that. Anybody else? Yes.
Thank you for being here. Since you're so organized, what advice would you give to someone who's total opposite of you? Got pretty much the stories and the content there, and I'm probably old enough to be your mom, so like you would be advising your mom, how do you pull it all together with getting organized? That's not a strength that I have, but and my content is of a serious mental nature, so I think that's kind of messed with me too during these kind of dark times, and I'm just having a hard time pulling it together to end it and give these stories that have been entrusted to me about family members who died by suicide. So I'm just trying to pull it all together, but they've given me the stories, I already have it, and now I'm just like can't seem to get past the hump. And with the most recent ones in the news, it just like spiraled me down, like, oh my God, how do I end the book when it keeps happening, you know, all the time around us?
I think I have a technical answer, and then I have like a full overarching answer. I think that simplifying the work that you have to smaller pieces does help, and I mean that in let's say you've been given like a storyline about somebody who, you know, worked in a factory fell upon hard times, had difficult relationship with his children and his wife, and eventually, you know, committed suicide out of despair. Taking that story and putting like factory worker, family issues, suicide, despair, and then putting it like that, and then just downgrading all of them to like that information like that, and then spreading them out in front of you. And you can organize them into a pattern that makes sense without having to read through them and be like, does this flow into this one? Because overarchingly, you'll be able to kind of like organize that a little bit easier when you're not looking at like the full breadth of all of the pages of that stuff. And then when you go in to do that, you can kind of just, and I've done this in the past, highlight whatever story that is and then cut paste it here, and then when it's cut paste, then you can reread through it and move the small ones that need to be placed in different places to where that they actually belong, if there is any issue with where they're placed at all. And then the overarching answer is, when you're sitting down to create a book, this is a singular piece of art. The way that people are going to be experiencing this is an emotional journey. What do you want them to feel at the beginning of the emotional journey? How do you want them to feel as they are slogging through the middle of the emotional journey? And how do you want them to feel at the end, after they, not at the end when they're reading what you've said at the end, but when they close the book and they're sitting with it like this, what emotion do you want them to feel as they are stepping away out of the world that you've built for them?
Thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome.
I felt that.
I have one more question. Just curious, how do you pick the cover image for your books? What is your process?
That's fun for me, actually. So most of the time publishers don't let you. They just send you a cover in the mail and they're like, this is yours. And you're like, okay, like, you know,
Oh,
you can
really?
fight them about it, but yeah. So for the Wicker King, my publisher was very open with me about their ideas. I actually got to pick the models that are on the cover, and for both books, they sent me like a catalog of models in New York, and they were like, which ones do you like? And I'm like, look at these people. And then they were like, we are thinking about doing something that is either very like fantasy book cover, like, you know, real people, very CGI looking, or something that's a little bit more rustic. And I was like, let's go with rustic. We'll try that. We want to make it look like it's notes, because there are a lot of notes that are written inside of this book. And then they were like, okay, cool. And then they took it and they gave it back to me. And they're like, we also added this thing where the pages fade from white to black. And I was like, holy shit. Like, that is the coolest thing I've ever seen. And like, genuinely, the amount of attention that I got on Instagram was from that creative decision alone. And this creative decision has an award as well for book design. For this one, I actually had like a deeper conversation with my publisher. This is the picture of the love interest, it's not the picture of the main character. I wanted, because the entire book is about looking up at space, you know, people looking at each other and feeling very pensive about what it is that they're observing and like analyzing it while they're, you know, feeling this. And I wanted the reader to feel what the main character felt while looking at the woman that she loves, you know? And to not have her be looked back at in return, but to have her looking out up at the stars. And that's gotten like a little bit of, a lot of people don't really understand it. It's a story about a white girl who develops a relationship with a black girl, and a lot of people read the way that this white girl is described, and they're like, she must be black. And she's described as being like really big and really strong and really like kind of brutish, very like aspects of like butch culture is also something that she's very interested in. And there have been some interactions about that, about people being like, I assumed that a character is black because of all of these things that we associate with anti-black descriptions of black women. Whereas like what I was writing was like, there aren't very many portrayals of like white poverty and white ingenuity within poverty circumstances, considering the fact that a majority of poor people are in like Appalachia, like, you know, and it's something that I know a lot about for some weird reason. And I was just like, I want to showcase a family that is holding it together in a circumstance where the adults that are around them are trying to give them the best resources that they can, that they are utilizing their money very, very specifically, that they are creating, you know, the discipline to be able to succeed and expand beyond their circumstances with this kind of character group. So there was some issue with that in regards to what I chose to have on the front, because a lot of people were like, oh, of course that's the main character. And I'm like, no, it's not. She's the the rich girl from the city who's coming to her little town, and like, you know, and portraying that relationship of like a poor white girl and a very, very, very rich black girl was something that I wanted to create because there isn't that much representation for that circumstance out there at all. So I don't know if I would have made that decision knowing what I know now. Maybe I would have put both of them on the cover, but that's what I wanted for this. And then for this book, they made a cover that was very, very ugly, and I wrote them a mean email. I was like, do not do that. And they were like, okay, well, what do you want? And I was like, I really want it to be like a 1911 painting from the original Peter Pan, and I want it like melting and digitized. And they were like, that won't sell well. You're getting a flower with some fire. And I was like, all right. So that's how it works. Anyone else? Go ahead.
So you said that you have also been passionate, at least in the past, with painting, sculpting, dance, is that right?
Yeah.
I was just wondering if that ever informs the way that you write now, just like the other sort of, or if you ever use like other artists?
I do. Let me see if I can grab my phone, because I am writing a book about art, and the way that I describe my characters is very, very influenced by art and about, you know, the way that you look at certain things. And let me, I'm also still posting it on Tumblr, so. Okay.
Do you have a Tumblr now?
I do have a Tumblr. It is Kayla Apocalypse.
Okay.
And, all right, so let's see. All right, so it is about Icarus meeting his love interest, Helios. And it reads, Icarus came to a stop 2 feet in front of the other boy and looked down at him. Helios's face was like a statue come to life, crests and shadows in alabaster and blue, cow-eyed, dimple-chinned, long-lashed beauty, and for one violent second, Icarus wished he had the time to paint him. And then in The Way to the Stars, at the very end, when the main character is walking down the, you know, thing to go to the spaceship, to go and leave, she gazed at Maria's nape in front of her and wondered who Maria's Alexandria was, whether Maria missed them like a burn and felt the time between them stretching. Amatunde placed a blue-black hand on Ryan Bird's shoulder and squeezed. Ryan looked back at her and found the same wonder-terror in her blue-black eyes. That's how I describe dark-skinned people. And then in The Wicker King, this is a German version. Ooh, I can't read from it. I gave away all my copies, and now I just carry that one around to show the art. But very much impacted by my experience with, you know, painting. And I'll describe, I won't be like, oh, her chocolate skin or whatever. I'll like talk about like, I think there's this part in my Train Heist book where one of the characters talks about how a girl that they met was brown as sable. And like, I'll talk about things in that way. Any more questions about the writing process before I go?
It sounds like that you're able to write multiple books at the same time. So how are you able to stay organized with what you want to put in book A, what you want to put in book B, what you want to put in? Because I don't think that I met anyone that can write. Usually, writers that I know, they have one thing that they're focusing on. But you seem to be multitasking in your writing.
Yes and no. I think that when you're coming up with a story and you're very excited by an idea, it's easy to get distracted. And instead of getting distracted and starting a new book, I will write out the full plot of whatever it was interesting me and just shelve it. So what I have are many, many plots that are written in entirety, and I just have them in a folder. And when an opportunity comes for me to start a new book or to pitch a new book or to try to, you know, sell a new book or something like that, I have those pitches to draw from. So it's easier that way. So right now I'm currently working on Icarus, and I have a Lady Spy novel on the shelf, and the Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde novel on the shelf, and then a novel about like fairies also on the shelf. So I'll get to those later, you know.
Well, we just want to thank you for your time. Thank you for your work. Thank you for really making sure that you are representing parts of the community that aren't necessarily talked about, and representing them in an accurate and authentic way. I know that our teams have really appreciated it, because I know in our community, it's one of those things like, okay, that's okay that you're whatever you are or whatever you choose to be, but we don't want to talk about it necessarily. So I just want to thank you for giving them a voice and giving them the opportunity to share their voice, because that's been very important for kids, not just in the South Holland community, but kids in Forest Park, kids in Oak Lawn, kids everywhere, and teens everywhere. So I just want to thank you for what you do, and thank you for being the amazing poetic author that you are. And thank you for coming today.
Thank you very much. And I'd like to say thank you to everyone here as well. LGBT authors, there was a time when nobody showed up to these events for us. So having people to talk to about my work and about my feelings and about my process is, you don't even know what it means to me that you showed up today.